Hello and welcome back to Eva and Richard's gardening adventures. So a lot of people ask me about composting and hot compost, and the question I get is, why is my compost not composting? So today I want to show you some examples of some things that can go wrong and what you can do to fix them so that you can compost or even hot compost. Let's have a look. For those of you that have watched our previous videos, you'll remember we have a 3-bin compost system with bin number 1, number 2, number 3, and in a previous video I explain how that works and what we do about that. But this is bin number 1 at the minute. It's not very full. We emptied it into bin number 2, which is this one here, about a week ago, and since we emptied it we've added a bunch of stuff to it, and it is just over 50 degrees. I don't know if you can make that out in the picture, but that thermometer is showing just above 50 degrees. Now if you think about the components that you need for hot composting or even just composting, is you want the right ratio of green and brown, so materials with the right ratio of nitrogen to carbon. You need the right moisture content, and you need oxygen. And the other thing you need, of course, is volume. Our bay number 1 is about 1.5 cubic meters when it's full, but it's nowhere near that. So why is that 50 degrees already? Well, when we put the ingredients in, we carefully mixed the greens and browns, and the one addition that we added also was quite a lot of grass, which we get from a neighbour. And grass heats things up really quickly. There you can see it. I talked before in previous videos about how you want to chop everything quite small, and grass by its very nature is very small, but you can see other bits and bobs here are chopped up quite small as well. We also have shredded paper. This is shredded office paper, just white paper. And every other material that's in here. So mainly this is garden waste. There's a few little bits and bobs of old soil from little plant pots, etc. And what you can't see is also wood chips. So it's got the right mix of things, right amount of kind of erosion and right amount of moisture content. And it's also summertime now. In the summer, this sort of thing just heats up a lot quicker. But I'll move the thermometer onto bay number 2. Again, this doesn't work well on the camera, but you can see the arrow is in the red zone there, in the hot zone, and it's above 55. It's almost 60 degrees. See, the compost is not ready. It's been in bay number 1 for a few months, maybe about 3 months, and it doesn't look like finished compost. And one indication where you know it's not finished compost is because it's hot. So works on bacterial action. There won't be many worms in there because it's too hot for them. And just whilst I'm here, I'm going to show you also bay number 3. Which has been sat, the compost here has been sat in bay number 3 for a while now. I would say since mid-May, so it's been more than a month, and it's cooled down. I checked the temperature earlier, it was about just under 30 degrees, and I planted these winter squash in here. And they're doing really quite well. There's 2 in there, and there's 1 in a pot behind it that's for elsewhere. They're obviously enjoying the warm soil. I looked for examples of compost bins that maybe weren't working as well as people thought they would. You can see, if you can make that out, there's a lot of potato leaves. So clearly somebody's harvested their potatoes and they chucked them on top. The bits of timber here from a construction project, that would take a very long time to compost, particularly as they are off the ground. I don't know if you can make this out, but there's like a metal cage underneath, so there's a lot of air coming in here, therefore it dries it out, not enough moisture, and probably not the right ratio of greens and browns. Things aren't being chopped up, so they're still quite big. I can see a few old potatoes in here. Again, if you have those, you want to chop them up into smaller pieces. So this works well if you need a pile where you just chuck stuff, and then you worry about that later. But that's not going to compost, whether that's slow or fast. Different setup here, these plastic compost bins. They're quite good, they look quite neat. You take the lid off, you chuck everything in, and that's it. They do keep the moisture in, and they also keep the rain out, so you can adjust obviously the moisture. They keep rats out mostly and that sort of thing if you're worried about that, and it's just a neater solution. The difficulty with those is, whilst they're kind of just about big enough in size, you can't turn them over very easily, and I also find the bottom composts quicker than the top, so there's a little hatch on the other side, and you open it and get the compost out, but I find that quite messy, so I prefer a wooden setup. But obviously if you've got a backyard, or if you haven't got space for wooden setup, then this is a good solution. I would say you get things composting in here, not necessarily hot composting. This is a good example. Three bays. Let's have a look in here. So looks like garden waste, some rhubarb leaves, some artichoke leaves, and bits of grass, maybe a few dandelions or so. What if you can make it out in here is what I would say here is the main reason why this is not composting as quickly as it could do is the materials haven't been chopped up. So they've just been chucked in as they are, which is fine. This will compost, but you can make it out. Oh, I'm struggling to reach. Materials here quite dry because there's a lot of air. When you don't chop things up, there's a lot of air in between. So I would say this is, at least on the top, it's a little bit dry. Also, this time of year, there's a lot of green materials going into the garden waste, and it won't hot compost unless you get browns in as well. As a reminder, browns are anything woody, so paper, cardboard, sawdust, leaves, that sort of stuff. You want to get that, if you mix that in here, some shredded paper, maybe some cardboard, some wood chip, that would get things going faster. You don't need any kind of container to compost. What you can do is just make a pile like this pile. What you want to be mindful of is the size, so I would say this is a good size. There's maybe about 2 cubic meters in there, so big enough, it's got the right amount to be able to speed up and heat up. Again, like in the previous example that we saw, this time of year in the garden you're getting predominantly greens, you're getting predominantly garden waste that is nitrogen rich rather than carbon rich. So if you want this to hot compost, this is where you now want to add your brown materials. The other thing you need to be mindful as well is when it's windy and hot like it is today, this pile could easily dry out. So I would water this with a garden hose. There's no point trying with a watering can. What you want is a garden hose. Ideally you want to layer all your materials, a layer of green, a layer of brown, and then water it, a layer of green, a layer of brown, until you get to the top. And then you could cover this up with a sheet of plastic to stop evaporation and keep the moisture in. So this would be the equivalent of bay number 3. You can see it does look quite like compost already. People often do is they cover it up. You can use any kind of plastic material or cardboard, or some people use carpet, and that stops any weed seeds that may have survived the process. What's happened here is people have planted a pumpkin, quite common. What's happened here is there's a 3-bay pallet system underneath here, and people have come and they've chopped a lot of the vegetation down. One of the things I always say is you need to chop things up and you need to mix them well. If you do have a pile like this and you want to get it going, I would say chop everything up, mix it with the right amount of greens and browns. Again, because things have just been piled on top, there's air gaps underneath, there's probably just too much air, not enough moisture, things are drying out with the wind. So this will compost down eventually, but it won't compost very quickly. Certainly it won't hot compost. So the benefit of hot composting, amongst others, is that you won't get any weed seeds because they'll be killed in the process, and also you're getting very nice compost very quickly, which if you using a no-dig system like we do, but any kind of system, you want organic matter to add to your soil. Another example of composting is leaf mould. Leaves take a lot longer to compost, and the main composting action for leaves is fungal rather than bacterial. So some people mix leaves in with their normal compost as a brown ingredient, but it is a good idea to have a separate leaf bin like this. This looks like it's a lot of sycamore leaves in there. Again, if you have the option of chopping them up, but if not, and you have a separate bin like this tucked away in the corner of the garden, you would put all your leaves in, and this bin was full right to the top at the beginning, so last autumn, and it's halved in size at the end of the summer and towards the autumn. This will look quite nice. Generally people say to allow between a year or 2 for leaf mould to compost down. Nice little setup here. Pallet compost bin with this carpet on top to keep it nice and warm and keep the moisture in as well. It's a good idea, any kind of cover. And you can see everything's been nicely chopped up into smallish bits. Cardboard in here, some garden waste, a good mix of greens and browns, and you can just see that's kind of starting to compost nicely. So here's a setup that you might think would be good to try at home. I think what's happened here is mainly some kitchen waste. I can see a bit of eggshell, and possibly some sort of garden waste as well. And because this is an urban setting, it's been covered up with this box, which makes it look a lot neater. What I would say about this setup is that if you think about some of the things I've talked about before in terms of volume, really if you want this to compost quickly, you haven't got enough volume there. It's just not big enough. So it's a good way if you've just got a few bits and bobs that you don't want to send to landfill, and that's absolutely fine. But in terms of composting, and certainly hot composting, this will take quite a long time. A setup that is good for the home is this hot bin. It's essentially an insulated box. It's quite neat and tidy, not too big, about the same size as the wheelie bin, a bit taller. And in theory you can put all sorts of food waste in, so you can put cooked food in, you can put meat and fish, bones, etc. It's insulated and it keeps things really hot, and it composts down very quickly. What I'm finding is that it does get very hot, particularly when you put grass in like I did yesterday. So the temperature there is 50 degrees. Can't really see them when you put your hand in. Just very hot. The insulation's quite thick. That's about 1.5 inches, about 5 centimetres. And the whole thing is just very neat and very convenient. Okay guys, that's it for today. I hope that's given you a bit of a better understanding as to why some composts aren't composting and what you can do to speed up composition. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you haven't seen my other video on composting where I explain the 3-bay system, then have a look at that, and have a look at our other videos as well. Bye!